Focus is, right? So as the name suggests, Bank Focus is a database platform where the focus is on the collection of banks information around the world, and that includes listed banks and private banks as well. All right, and one of the biggest key advantage of using Bank Focus is that because when you are looking at banks data across the world, they are all reported in different accounting format, in different currency. So what Bank Focus allows the end user to do is to have an apple-to-apple comparison, especially when it comes to a research purpose that you need to collect a lot of the data, and you need to be able to do your analysis or comparison on the same level, right? Using the same standards, using the same variables as well. So what I'll be going through today is how you can actually use Bank Focus to extract all those information, or at any point in time, if you need to make reference or search for any particular bank, right, then Bank Focus will allow you to have the capability to do so. So when you first log in, at the top right hand side, you will be able to see your username, right? So of course, in this case, it's not the most important thing, but what is really helpful is that you will have this question mark icon at the top right hand corner. So if you click on that, so this is the online virtual help menu that we have, and it's constantly been updated and enhanced with every new updates that we have. So in terms of the help menu, sometimes you may need help, whether you're in the library or whether you're somewhere in the campus or at home trying to access Bank Focus. And what this help menu have, aside from sharing with you what are the new developments, new enhancements that we have made, we also have the interactive walkthrough. So on some of the key functions of Bank Focus, there will be this step-by-step walkthrough if you need some help on this. We also have recorded videos for most of the core functions in the Bank Focus platform. And thirdly, we have the online guide. So for the online guide, if you click on it, is that sometimes when you come across certain wording, certain terms that you may not be familiar with, right? You can just key in the term on the left-hand side, right? And then it will be able to provide you with more details about certain terms that you need more information on. Okay, so let me just go back to the Bank Focus, all right? Okay, so that's the online help guide. So before I even go to the navigation part of Bank Focus, usually for most new users, what I will also be doing is to highlight some of the settings that you can use to help you in getting those information quickly and easier. So on the left-hand side panel, you will see that there's actually several different kind of shortcuts. So I'm going to introduce to you the last one, which is My Bank Focus. So My Bank Focus is the settings. So if you click on it, right, it will bring you to a settings page. But generally, as a user, you don't really need to do too much configuration, right? But this is really more setting your own preferences when you are trying to extract certain kind of information, right? So I won't go through each and every one of them, but I'll go through some of the key ones that I think would be really helpful to you. Now, the first one would be financial accounts. So if you click on financial accounts, it will bring you to a page where you can set certain preferences. Preferences such as like when a company has a few different accounts available, do we want the searches or the results to be based on which preference? Okay. So usually for most users, they will choose either the most recent accounts available or a preferred account, right? So a preferred account can be in the case where, especially for listed banks, right, they tend to publish two types of financial statement. One would be the consolidated statement, and another one would be unconsolidated statement. So what do they mean? All right. So if you can imagine, is that a listed bank usually is quite a big organization, and they tend to have a few or many subsidiaries. Right. So usually when they publish their financials, those financials would include the financial numbers of the listed bank and their subsidiaries as well. So that's what we usually call it as consolidated statement, because it's all consolidated together, right? So if you talk about unconsolidated accounts, that will mean that the financial statement that you're looking at are purely the bank, the entity bank itself, excluding any subsidiaries, right? So in terms of the preference that you have, right, is always available. It's just that at the first glance, when you're extracting the data, what would be shown to you first, whether is it consolidated or unconsolidated. So again, all these are preferences. They are not restriction, right? So this is just to help you to make your selection of the final results a bit quicker and easier towards your end objective. Now, in terms of the financial year cutoff, right, you may choose to change this or just choose to leave it. Reason being is because when we look at all the different banks, whether is it in the same country or different country, they may have different financial year end, right? Some of the banks, their financial year end could be end of March, end of June, end of September, end of December. So depending on your research objective, right? If there's a need to align to say that, okay, I want to set it as within my research scope, the fiscal year end or the financial year end is towards end December, for example, to be considered as that year financials, you can set it. But if it doesn't really matter, right, you can just leave it to the default of 31st March, right? And these options usually is more relevant to some of our corporate customers, where they need to do certain kind of credit risk analysis, and they may have certain financial year end date that they need to adhere to. But if you don't have, it's okay, you can just leave it. But just make sure that as and when that you make any changes to the settings, always scroll down to the bottom to click on the save button to lock in the changes. Right, so that's one part of it. The other part of it will be corporate structure. Right, why corporate structure is because sometimes when you are doing your research, right, and part of your research may got to do with how you define the ownership of the bank, right? And in this case, when we talk about ownership, commonly there are only two types of majority threshold, either 25.01% or 50.01% when you talk about majority share ownership. So this is where you can then determine that if we need to trace, if you want Bank Focus to help you to trace up to who are the parent company that owns the bank, for example, right? What would be the majority shareholder threshold that you want to set? Will it be 25.01% or 50.01%? Right. So again, this is up to you. But just that, typically when you are writing your papers, when you're doing your research, you need to put in certain controlled parameters or variables or assumptions into your research. So this is where you can then indicate a certain threshold that you have. Yes?
Can you please explain based on what these two numbers was selected, for example, 25 and 15?
Yeah, so for example, if you have a bank where they have a few shareholders, right? So based on what you have selected, how will you then define who would be a majority shareholder? So for example, if let's say I have a bank that have a shareholder that has 51% shareholding, right? And as well as another shareholder that has 26% shareholding. So how do you consider the threshold to identify the majority shareholder that will lead to the path? So for example, there can be shareholder of a shareholder. So in a more complex structure, a bank may have multiple layers of shareholders before we can identify who the parent company is. Right? So the threshold that you will be setting will be how Bank Focus will be trying to identify who will be the ultimate parent company. So that's where the settings come into play.
In research, we call concentrated ownership. Concentrated ownership. Yeah.
Okay. So in this case, concentrated ownership likelihood would be using 50.01% as a majority shareholders. Okay. So again, these are all how you can say yes.
Yes. I just want to get your advice for financial statement.
Yeah.
Usually, when we do research, for example, we have data for yearly in 2024, 2023. So in that case, what is your advice for the financial year end? Is it better December or March better? Because usually when we extract the data, for example, the profitability, and then we will look at GDP of the country. So which quarter or year end your advice for us to put in the layout?
Well, okay. So the question is about whether there's any particular fiscal year end that we should set when we are trying to collect data. And I'll say that the answer is that there is no hard and fast rule about the fiscal year end that you want to set. A lot of times, most of the users, if they were to change it, is only because that in the certain country that they are in, for example, or their research scope, right, has a fixed fiscal year end that you want to use, right? So the fiscal year end may or may not be the most important parameters, but it's up to you to determine that, right? Because, for example, if you're looking at several banks in the population or the research scope that you have, and there are some banks that publish their financials towards end March, some towards end June, some towards end September, for example. The year of how we consider these financials to be, whether they should be considered as 2022 financials or 2023 financials, will depends on the fiscal year end that you have set. Right? So it's more towards of how you would like the fiscal year end date to be, but that may not have a significant impact on the research itself. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So the third one that I want to show is on the display option. Right, so if you click on the display option, for some of the users here, you may see that under the list of currencies, your selection right now could be limited list. And when we talk about limited list, and you look at the default currency, you can see that there's basically a short list of some of the commonly referred currency around the world, right? And this would be the list of currencies that you can use to make reference to when you are trying to extract the financial data, right? So what we are trying to do here is that instead of limited list, under list of currency, we change it to complete list. So once you change it to complete list and you look at the selection above, you can see that there's actually a much longer list of currency that you can select from, right? So instead of USD, euros, right, you can select, Malaysian ringgit, Indonesian rupees, Sing dollar, and so on. So again, under the display option is for you to enable the entire list of currencies so that subsequently, when you are trying to extract the financial data, you will then be able to extract them based on the currencies that you want it to be or have it to be converted. But right now, what this display option menu does is to allow you to choose a default currency that you'll want to make reference to as a default, right? You usually can change it later on, right? But just that each and every time you look at a financial report of a bank, right, you would like to look at it from a particular currency as a preference, right? So in this case, I'll just choose USD, all right? And then in terms of the display information, you can choose to reflect those information in local language characters when available, right? So for certain banks in, let's say, in the Middle East, for example, they could have their bank name or some of the director's name in the local language, right? So this is where you can reflect that as well. But of course, for most users who may not have any particular preference, you can just leave it as it is. And just make sure that you click on save. Right, so for the initial setup for all users, this will be the few key things that I would like to highlight so that it makes it easier for you when you are trying to make reference to the information on bank focus or trying to extract those data. Right, so just coming back to the main page that we have. So at the very first, you will have this portfolio landing page. So for the portfolio landing page, I will say that this is typically more relevant, not so much on the research side, but typically for some of our other users who are using Bank Focus to manage their portfolio of counterparties. Let's say, for example, if I'm a bank, right, I need to have some monitoring on the counterparties of banks that we work with, right? So they usually may use the portfolio landing page as a dashboard to look at, okay, what could have been the changes when it comes to the capital adequacy, asset quality, liquidity funding, or earnings, and so on, right? So that's more for, I would say, usually for more corporate use case, right? But when it comes to research, right? So very firstly is that you would be looking to search for either a single bank to do a deep dive into their information, or you'll be looking at a population of bank that fits your research criteria. So how do you actually search for that? So on the left-hand side, we have this search button, right? They can click on the magnifying glass. So what this does is that it brings you to this page where at the top, you will have this Google bar-like thing that you can actually key in a particular name of a bank. So if you're just looking for one single bank to understand a bit more about the bank, you can just key in. So for example, if I key in, let's say Maybank, for example, right? So it can be all the different names that you may have. So usually you probably would have a particular name in mind already. But just to show you is that if you key in certain keywords, it will show you some of the closest matched results, right? So of course, if you were to key in the name plus the country, right, it will actually narrow down the search to the banks in that country. Okay, so this will show you some of the overview information, so you'll be able to know, okay, which will be the one that you would like to choose. Right, so what we're going to do next is to show you what you can see in a single bank report before we look at how we can use Bank Focus to search for multiple banks at one go. Okay, so take for example, if I were to click on Maybank Islamic Berhad, right, you can see that the full registered name is here, the country and the address, right? The bank, the entity that they are, and the BVD ID. So for each and every record that we have within Bank Focus, we actually use a unique ID tag to it. And usually the unique ID is to allow us to make sure that if there are any updates to the bank, whether is it updating of information regarding the address, the directors, the shareholders, or even new financials that have been published, we can use this unique code to find and then update accordingly. And it's usually based on the combination of the two character ISO code of the country that they are in. Let's say in Malaysia, which will be MY, followed by their business registration number. Right, so this is just more for your reference only. And of course, on the right-hand side, we'll have an overview of their total assets, right, just to give you a very quick view of them. So once you decided that, okay, Maybank Islamic Berhad is the bank that I want to do a deep dive of, you can just click on it, and that will bring you to the reports page. Okay, so you can see that in the platform, you will actually have these 3 dots at the top left-hand corner. So what this does is that when you click on it, you actually expand out the menu for you. So this is what we call the different chapters of the report. So each chapter is like each section of a report that gives you different kind of information. All right. So when we look at the first one, the default one, we are at key information. So this will actually give you an overview of the key information about the entity that you're looking for, right? Where it will tell you the operating status of the entity, some of the ID information, whether is it a listed or unlisted banks, right? And who would be the global ultimate owner. So usually the term that we usually use would be global ultimate owner, which is commonly referred to as the parent entity that owns the bank that you're looking for, right? Then of course you can always click on it to look at the report of the bank. So aside from that, we also have some information like the contact details, right? The specialization. So within Bank Focus, it contains information about different banks. And of course, when we talk about different banks, is that there are banks that specialize in Islamic banking, there are banks that specialize in commercial banking, savings bank, and so on. So we also have that kind of categorization within Bank Focus as well. So that later on, which I'll show you, is that if you're trying to look for a certain kind of banks, right, whether is it in this country or multiple country, right, you can use specialization as one of the criteria to narrow down your search to a certain group of banks. Okay. So we also have the date of incorporation, the ranking by assets, and so on. Below, you'll find some overall statistics and key value, and as well as the financial profile of a bank. So within Bank Focus, we will collect and store the financial data as far back as up to the last 30 years, right, if it's available. Right? So again, last 30 years, but again, depends on the availability of those financials, right? So obviously for listed banks, because they are regulated, they will need to publish their financials every year, every quarter. But for the private banks, the non-listed ones, it really depends on whether it is available publicly, that we are able to collect and put it into Bank Focus. Okay, so what you see over here is just a very high-level financial profile. Right? Later on, I'll show you the detailed breakdown of the financial statements. Okay, so the first chapter that we look at is the key information. Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Just now, when we do the formatting, we put consolidated, but here it appears unconsolidated. Is it because Maybank Islamic, the consolidated in the Maybank, big Maybank basically? Is that means even we put consolidated, it will appear those which is unconsolidated also?
Yes, correct. So the earlier on, the settings that we have set is just a preference that we set consolidated as the first thing that we set if it is available. So in this case, for this bank, if we click over here, you can see there's only one type of financials, which is unconsolidated, right? So however, if a bank that you're looking at has 2 sets of financials, consolidated and unconsolidated, we would be looking at the consolidated figures by default as a first, but you still can toggle between the different sets. Okay.
How about the usage of the currency? Does now we set in the USD?
Correct. All right. So earlier on, we have set as the USD currency. So later, okay. So for this one, it's just a financial profile. Later, I'll show you in terms of the financial statement that you see the converted currency. So under the report format, right, company profile, we will then have, aside from the context, right, so this is pretty straightforward. We also have the industry and activities, right? So when we collect all this information, our primary source of all this collection is usually first from the business registry of each and different country as the golden source of truth. But of course, we will also work with different information provider in each and every country to collect as much information as possible, which can also be, for example, a description about the bank, about the business of the bank, and so on, which usually the government registries doesn't have so much write-up on those banks. Usually what they will have is, for example, the industrial code that they will be using, or they have, that the bank has registered themselves as, right? But when it comes to the write-up of the bank itself, the kind of business that they are in, right? So those will be the portion of information that we try to get either from their annual report, from their website, or from other sources that we may be able to put our hands on. Right? So you can also see that if you expand further, this will also provide you with more information about the bank. So this will be very helpful, especially if you need to write up a narrative of your research, right? In terms of the banks that are being involved or considered as part of your research population, right? So this will give you a bit more context into that. So other information that we have would be, for example, identifiers. Right, so usually for research purpose, I would say that the identifier's ID itself may not be super relevant, right? Because you're not using it for a business use case, you're using it for research, right? But then again, because bank focus is being used by our customers in different sectors, different fields, where identifiers would usually be one of the very important piece of information that they will need to refer to. So just to show you what are available, right? The other ones that are probably a bit more relevant for research use case is that when we look at the accounting information, so this will actually tell you what is the most recent accounts that is available in Bank Focus itself, which is 2023, and when the latest accounts is available in, the type of accounts that are available, whether is it unconsolidated, consolidated, and so on. How many years of financial statements do we have for this bank in Bank Focus, and the currency that they're publishing, the closing date of the bank, right? The source of filing type, where we get it from, right? And the accounting template itself, right? Why we put this as an accounting template is because depending on the kind of filings that the bank has done, right? So obviously for most banks, they will file their financials in accounting template that relates to a bank financials, right? But there are certain banks that may file their financials to the registry in a corporate template, because that could be the default template that's been used by those registry, right? It may not be the most important thing, but just to show you why there could be different accounting template. Okay, so now we move on to the financials. So for financials itself, if you look at the global detailed format, so within Bank Focus, what we have done is that we have created the standardized template to allow end users to compare the financials of a bank, let's say in Malaysia, versus a bank in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in China, or even in the Middle East, for example. All right. Okay. So earlier on, hold on. I think when I was setting the settings, I may not have saved it. So let me just go back to the display option again. Okay, I save it USD as a default. Okay, I'll just go back to the research, to the report layout. Okay, so over here, I think this is the one where there's a default being chosen by administrator. But anyway, it's a very simple thing in terms of how we can change it. So for example, okay, so within the report site, this is what you'll be able to see when it comes to the detailed financial line items of a bank, right? Where you actually see the different line items based on the income statement and so on that is related to the bank. And if you see all these numbers in blue, when you click on it, right, it will actually open up a small window which will show you how we get those information from. Right, so it will show you the breakdown if you want to see. And you can see that for all these items that has a number to it, right, and there's a PDF icon on the right hand side. When you click on it, it will actually show you, okay, this one should have a figure. Okay, hold on, let me see why this one doesn't have. Okay, but before that, you'll see that there are a lot of NA, and so on. Why is that the case, right? The reason being is because for Bank Focus itself, we try to put in all the relevant financial line items that could be related to a bank. So some banks, they may declare, they may file those financial values on those line items that you see, but not each and every bank would have a value for those items. So don't be alarmed that how come I see a lot of NAs for those items. It's because when we look at the grander scheme of things, right? Bank Focus would be having a lot of different kind of banks data into the database. So there could always be certain financial line items that may not be available for those banks simply because they do not declare it, or it's not part of their accounting filings. Alright, so let me just quickly try to click on another one of them to show you the example of the PDF reference. Okay, that's funny because it's supposed to show you the page where we get the numbers from, right? So that's the whole purpose of the PDF. Okay, but as you can see over here, this is actually how we show the end users of where we get the final numbers at, so that when you're trying to do some of the reconciliation yourself or try to understand how these numbers are derived, so this is where it will show you. Okay, and for example, if you're looking at a particular bank report, right, you can actually change it accordingly. So for example, if you look at the top right hand side, we have this add or remove columns. You can actually click on it to customize the columns that you have. And you can just click on remove all to have your own columns. So you click on the plus sign to add. Okay, so then from over here, we have the time period in relative or absolute. So relative will refers to the last available year of financials that we have. So depending from banks to banks, the last available year could be 2023 or 2022 as the last available year. Whereas if we click on absolute, right, you'll be able to pick specific years that you want. Okay, but of course, it's also depends on the availability of it. Okay, so in this case, let's say maybe you would want to see the last 10 years, for example. So we can just click on all this. All right, and in terms of the currencies. Okay, so in this case, for example, if I were to choose USD, all right. The units of measurement, whether is it in units, thousands, million or billion, I choose 1000, and the exchange rate. So this is the part where for most of our users may have some question on is that, okay, if I were to choose to see financials across several years, what would be the exchange rate that Bank Focus would be using, right? So in this case, that we have a few options for you. The first option as a default is that we will use the exchange rate as per each closing date. So if we have selected to display the last 10 years, right? At each closing date will means that, for example, if the last available year is 31st December 2023, right? Then we will use the FX rate as of 31st December 2023 for this year financials. For the year prior 2022, we'll use the exchange rate as per 31st December 2022, and so on. So this is what we meant by at each closing date. If you select at last annual closing date, we will just use the last available year financials, which is 31st December 2023, right? And apply it across all the years. Right? So that's the difference between at each closing date and at last annual closing date. And the FX rate that we are using are all retrieved from the IMF website, right? So that's the primary source of where we get the FX rate from. And lastly, you can of course set your own rates, but if you don't need to, right, you can always just choose either one of the first two options. Right? Then you can just click on Add and click on Apply. So over here, as you can see, you will be able to see that for each of those years, you have the financial year end closing date, you will have the units of measurement that you have chosen, the currency, and as well as some of the header information. Right? Why this is important is because now in most of the research that you could be doing, it will usually consist of financials, or rather it consists of annual financials, which by default is 12 months. But there could be certain case where you want to look at the quarterly or interim financials of a bank, right? And different banks, the way that they publish the quarterly financials could be different. Obviously, for most banks, they publish or they reflect their quarterly financials, which is on a 3 months basis, Jan to March, April to June, and so on, right? So the numbers are only of a 3 months basis. But for some banks, they could be publishing the financials on a cumulative perspective. Let's say the first quarterly financials that they publish could be of 3 months, which is Jan to March. And then the second one that they publish could be of 6 months, Jan to June, and so on. So, which is the reason why we need to indicate how many months of financials that this financial statement is showing you, all right? And of course, some of the other values or other information, the audit status of the financials, the accounting template that was being used, the source that we are getting it from, and as well as the exchange rate that we are using. Okay. Therefore, then you will have all this breakdown over here below. So this is the standardized template that we use for all banks, right? Whether it's an Islamic bank, whether it's a commercial bank, and whether it's a bank in Malaysia or anywhere else. So this would be a standard template that we use. Okay, and again, we are looking at just one single bank, right? But of course, I'm going to show everyone what you can see within a single bank. Now, if you look at national format will be basically the actual financial spreading that this particular bank is using. Right? So that if you want to do a deep dive into this one particular bank, right? And obviously this bank is an Islamic bank. So if you look at the line items that comes out from an Islamic bank financials, you will see some of the line items that may not be wouldn't be what you usually see in the normal commercial bank, right, in Malaysia or any part of the world, right? So you can see that there will be certain items that is only relevant to Islamic banking, right? But then of course again, you can see that not each and every line item has a value, simply because those values may not be reported by the bank. But you'll start to see some of the other parts of it that you have the value from. Okay. just try to see, let me try and click on it, because we should be able to see the PDF here. Okay, so this is the example that I was trying to show earlier on, is that when you click on the PDF, it will actually show you where we get the numbers from, especially from our annual report. So that if you need to make certain reference at a certain point in time, you can see that, hey, you don't need to download the annual report itself. You can actually click on the number, click on the icon, and be able to find where we get the numbers from. Okay, again, all these are the original filings. So that's why you see that, okay, this number is reported in Malaysia Ringgit, whereas because of the configuration that we have made, we are looking at the numbers in USD. Okay, and as a user, right, so if you have your own account, you can always create as many different layouts as you want to, right? So if you have modified this and you think that, okay, this is something that I might be using regularly, right, for my research purpose, once you have done the changes in the add or remove columns, and you can see that at the top there will be a blue bar, just click on save as, okay, and you can save as whatever name that you're going to put it. Right, so in this case, let me just and yes. Click on save. Right, so once you have saved it, you can save as many different layout as you need. Then subsequently, you can then toggle between the different layout that is available to reflect the report accordingly. So you can see at the middle, I can just click on here and it will show me all the different layouts that I have. Okay, so aside from the actual value itself, Bank Focus also provide you with the growth rates, for example. So for example, if you want to have a very quick and easy way of looking at the data from the growth rate, let me just quickly go down. Right, so you can see that the changes, the comparison of changes on a year-to-year basis. So in this case, we're comparing 2023 to 2022, and you can see the percentage changes. Right, so this is just another quick and easy way for you to shortcut certain process when you're looking at certain parts of the bank information. So again, Bank Focus is meant to make your life easier when it comes to seeking references and trying to get the data, right? But usually how a lot of our research customers do is that they will extract all this data in bulk, right, in Excel, and then they do their own data massaging, right, according to the research scope. But before we get to that, I just wanted to show you what you can find within the user interface itself. Now, I won't go to each and every one of them because some of those, there are certain modules that may not be available or may not be subscribed by the school. But based on what would be really useful when it comes to research purpose. So the other one is also peer comparison. So sometimes you might be trying to explore idea about, okay, if I want to do my research, what are some of the other banks that I can have a very quick reference on. So this is where the peer comparison chapter would help you to get a head start, for example. So if you look at Maybank Islamic Berhad, we look at, okay, we want to know who are the peers of this bank, right? So if you use the peer comparison, very quickly you can see that, okay, these are actually all the other peers of the target bank that you're looking at, right? And what's it based on? So this is actually based on the closest 10 international entities, based on the total assets, based on the last available year, among the standard peer group. So the standard peer group in this case would be their specialization, which is Islamic Bank. Again, this is something that you can always make changes to, right? So for example, if you click on own peer group, right, you can see that you can actually change the way of how you define the peer comparison and so on. So it can be banks across the world, or it can be national banks, meaning you say that it can be banks within the same country, right? Based on the key common financial items and based on whichever year. Okay, so this is a very quick and easy way for you to identify who are the peers of the target bank that you have. Okay, so for the other parts of it is that, for example, if you need to get some further information about a bank, right? So, yes.
Basically, sometimes we need the data on monthly basis, quarterly, semi-annually. Is there any possible way that we target it? Or just annually? What I understood is just yearly basis.
Yes, so I'll say that for most banks, especially the unlisted ones, they would only publish their financials once a year. So it will only be available as financials on a yearly basis. When we talk about monthly, can you help me to understand a bit more about the monthly data that you're referring to?
Yeah, I mean, the financial statement and financial data are being dated on a monthly basis or maybe quarterly, the financial statement.
Okay, so usually the closest or the shortest frequency of a financial statement is on a quarterly basis.
Quarterly.
Yeah, correct. So because that's as close as what a bank may publish. So usually banks or any corporates, they do not publish their financials on a monthly basis. So there wouldn't be a financial statement that is based on a monthly basis.
No, I mean, personal information, for example. Can I get it in quarterly basis, for instance?
Quarterly as in, like whether do we have the quarterly statement of a bank? Yes, provided that those banks publish or report it or even file it. Because usually for private or unlisted banks, they do not file quarterly financials. It's usually only the listed banks that will publish their quarterly statements or quarterly financials, part of their regulatory requirements, but not to the private banks. So yes, you are able to get quarterly financials data in Bank Focus, but usually those who have it would be those listed banks only. Not so much about the private banks.
The banks will have this quarterly, so we can know how to do the data. Can you show, maybe you can show how you relate the quarterly?
Sure. Okay, so let me try to see where. Okay, so this one wouldn't have quarterly ones, but let me find a list of banks. Right, so I'm going to shortcut some of the search steps very quickly just to show you one example of a listed bank. Okay, let me just find a Islamic bank. Okay, so what I'm doing right now is that I'm trying to find a listed bank that specializes in Islamic banking, and I would look for listed based on the status. Okay, so we have about 100 Islamic banks that are listed, and when I click on view results, okay, so we have some of all these banks, so let me just click on the first one. Okay, so we don't have a default layout over here, but I can go to add or remove columns. I remove whatever that we're seeing right now. We click on the plus sign. Okay. Okay, that is interesting because there should be interim data available. Okay, just hold on for a while. Let me check with my colleague over here. Just give me a quick second. Okay, so just to answer your question is that yes, there is a feature available to show the quarterly report, but I think it's something that I would get it resolved at the back end. But it is available. Then if you could just drop us an email after this session, I could actually show you a snapshot of it. Yeah, thank you. All right. So let me go back to the report itself. So if you look at the standalone report, right, you can see that there are multiple different chapters, and for some of those, it may or may not be relevant to your research. But then again, just to show you what other kind of information that you'll be able to have. For example, if you're looking at a listed banks, you can also look at their stock profile if you need to collate all those information as part of your research. The annual stock data. So sometimes your research parameters or the objective may be related to their stock performance of listed banks, right? So this would be the place where you can get it. Now, bank focus is unlike the likes of Bloomberg or any other machines where they are more real-time market data focused. Bank focus is not a real-time market data database, but of course we do collect stock data on a daily basis, just that it's not a daytime tracking, right? So this is again where you can actually get all this data from for just one bank, right? So again, right now we are still at the stage where we are showing you what you can see from just a single bank. Later on, I'll show you how you can actually get to have a wider population of banks, then get the data from there. So aside from the annual stock data, we also have the evaluation, the pricing series, and so on. Right, so I'll just leave it to every user to explore this yourself. So in terms of the other data that we have, if they also do issue bonds or loans, it'll be available here. Credit default swaps. But if you need to understand a bit more about their board of directors, for example, right? We have information in regards to their current directors or previous directors. Okay, why this is somewhat relevant is sometimes depending on the scope of your research. It may, for example, some of the research articles that I came across would be aside from just talking about financials, it may also talk about corporate governance. It may talk about how does the makeup of board of directors would have any influence towards the performance of a bank, for example. Right. So if you need to find more information about the board of directors, this is where you can actually get more information, right? And because for bank focus, we usually would index most of the information. So take for example, if we look at one of the board of directors over here, right, we can see that he actually is holding roles in 2 companies, right? There are also other examples where a single director could be holding roles in more than 2 companies, maybe a lot more companies, right? But just to show you in terms of when you are trying to understand a bit more of the corporate makeup, you're trying to look into the directors of the bank that you're interested in, right? You can see that this individual would be holding on directorship role in multiple companies, right? And this is how we actually use the indexation process where, just like a unique individual, we'll be able to then look at look up this individual to say that, oh, this person is holding roles to multiple banks or multiple companies and so on, right? So if your research angle involve corporate governance, involve trying to find out more information about the board of directors, so this is one place that you can take a look at. So this is just on the board of directors. What about corporate ownership? So if you need to understand a bit more about the ownership structure of a bank, right? So this is where you can look at, okay, who are the shareholders of a bank? So right now we are looking at the ownership structure to find out who are the shareholder of one particular bank that you're looking at. Right, so this is just a mapping. You can zoom in and zoom out. Or if you want to look at it from a geographical footprint to see that, okay, for this particular bank, right, in terms of the entities that they have around the world, right? So some of them they may have, say, all around the world. Some they may have only in one country, two countries, and so on. So this will be a quick and easy way to look at it. Or if you need to look at the corporate group of a bank. So this will actually show you that the bank that you're looking at, Bank 𝐸, right? You can see there's an orange bar to show that this is the bank you're looking at. And then below, you can see who are the other subsidiaries that they own as well, right? And this will show you, the second column will show you the country in the 2 ISO characters, the level of ownership, whether it's 100%, 60%, and so on, right? The level of ownership, whether it's the first layer, second layer, third layer, and so on. The source of where we get it from, right? So if you move your mouse over, you can see the source. The date when it was last updated, right? So when you see that there are certain dates that could be far away, right? It could simply be because that there are no changes to the shareholding structure of the corporate group itself, right? So if you scroll further down, right, you will then be able to see some of the other legend information, and as well as the ultimate owner definition. Right? So again, we try to put in as much information as we can into the user interface, right? But of course, sometimes we also do not want to cluster everything together. So if there are certain information that you would like to find out that you do not see on the user interface, do try to look it up in the online help menu. If it's not available, you can always reach out back to us. Okay, let me see whether we have other documents related to this. So, for example, under research chapter, right, if you click on it, you should be able to see some of the industrial profile that is made available, right, in this subscription that we have in Bank Focus. So, for example, if you want to do a high level overview in terms of the banking industry profile, for example, you can always click on it, and you will actually, okay, this one may not be relevant, right? Let's see. Okay, that's weird. Never mind. But within the research chapter, we do have some of the write-up made available to you as well. Okay. Right. So when we talk about looking at a single bank report, this is what usually would be able to see. And if you need to export it, download it, you can always click on the Excel button to export it in the Excel format, or the PDF button to be of a PDF format, right? And this is just one single bank report. Now, what about if we are trying to look at multiple banks? Okay, so this is the part where probably is a bit more interesting. So let me just start over again, just to show you how we can use the combination of different criteria to search for a pool of banks. So usually, for most research, you probably, at the very beginning, you will have an initial set of criteria when I talk about, okay, what would be the kind of entities that you want to involve. And usually, it would go first by the location, right? So if you click on location itself, you can see that on the right hand side there's a few items that you can choose from. And the first one, maybe I click on world, region, country, or region and country. I click on that one. And once you click on that, you will see that we have regions based on geographical region, right? There you can see North America, Western Europe, and so on. And you can also see regions based on politically categorization, right? Where we have European Union, OECD, and so on, right? And you also have the individual countries itself. So, for example, if you want to confirm, okay, what are the countries that make up the OECD, right? You can just click on the small triangle beside the name, click on it, expand it out, and you see all those countries here. So again, you can still click on the plus sign to add those countries individually. But for this particular purpose, so for example, if I just want to include Middle East as a geographical region and Far East and Central Asia, right? You just click on the plus sign and it will just appear on the right hand side. Then you can just click on OK. Okay, so once you have selected the location at the start, you can see that by default we will include entities or banks that are having an active or unknown status. Why do we have active and unknown? It's because within Bank Focus, we would still have records of those banks that we previously have been collecting their data, but they may have stopped operating, right? Probably due to insolvency, due to bankruptcy, and so on, but we still keep their data. So that's why, in order to make sure that as part of your research, you are only making reference to information of actively operating banks, then you include this status of active or unknown. Why unknown? Is because sometimes the source that we get the information from, they may not explicitly say that, oh, this bank is actively operating, but there will still be financials made available or found by those banks year after year. So this is where we have the unknown situation. And you can see in this example is that the more filter that you include in this search, the number will get smaller and smaller. So in this case, we have two filters here, right? So you can see that there are two columns, step and search. So step will actually refers to the number of banks or entities based on each particular row. So if you talk about active or unknown operating status of a bank in Bank Focus, we have 123,000 of them. If you talk about in Middle East and Far East and Central Asia, we have about 6,300 of them. But if you combine these two criteria together, you can see that the numbers will be different. So banks in these two locations that are actively or they have an active operating status unknown is actually 4,578. Okay. And if we go into activities and industry, right, so this is where you can then include specialization as one of your criteria.
Sorry, this one is which part for this to begin this one? Where is the first step?
Okay, so the very first step is that you go to search, right? So when you go to search, this is what you will see as the main page. In terms of how we get all these different filters, right? The very first one that we use is actually location. So under location, we go to world, region, country, or region and country at the right hand side. Then from there, we just choose Middle East and Far East and Central Asia. Okay, so the next step that we can do is to include specialization. So if you click on specialization, if your research parameters or scope involve only certain types of banks, right? So in this case, it can be commercial bank, it can be savings bank, it can be any of those, right? But if you were to say, okay, Islamic bank, right, will be one of them, right, and plus any other banks, right, you can always just click on them and so on. So we can have Islamic bank, we can have commercial bank as part of your research population. And the most important thing is that you can always change the parameters that you want as and when you need to. So it's not that once you're selected, then it's fixed, right? You can always change it. You can tweak along with it, right? Before you get what you want. Okay, so you have the location, you have the specialization, right? And when it comes to financials, right? So you also want to make sure that okay, the data that you need would be at least maybe the last 10 years, right? So what you're going to do is that you can go to financials, you can go to available accounts. Okay, so this will be the part where you can choose that you want to make sure that the population that you have before you extract the data would have financials that belongs to a certain year, right? Right, so if you go to years with available accounts, we go to let's say you select past 10 years, right? So we want to have banks that will have financials over the last 10 years. And just click on OK. Right, so we have about 131 here. And furthermore, in your research parameter that may involve cross-border, for example, oh, you may only want to include or consider banks that may have certain kind of shareholder, right? You can always include this mix, this factor into the search, so that you can have a very specific set of banks into your research, right? But of course, I do know that each and everyone here who are sitting here today, who have joined us in teams, your research agenda, your research objective probably could be very different, right? So of course, there's no one fixed rule of what you should choose or what you need to choose, but just to show you what is available to you, and you can always tweak around with the selection of the criteria. Okay, so right now we have used this example of all these different filters. Okay, and do take note is that if this is the kind of search strategy that you might want to be using it again, right? At the top right hand side you have this save button, right? So you can just click on the save here. You can save it as a search. So for example, key in a name to it. Okay, and you can put any name, you can put a description to it, and you can click on save. So why is it helpful to save? It is because that once you have saved it, next time around when you log into BankFocus again, you have to do the same search, right? You can always go to load a search, right? And just load this search again, right? And the thing is that today, when we're doing this search, based on all these different filters, right, we have 131 banks. Maybe 3 months later, 5 months later, you have to refresh on the data, right? Using the same parameters, using the same filters. The number of banks could be different because certain banks may not meet the criteria that you have set this three months ago, for example. So the number of banks could be different. So this is one of the potential outcomes that you may see, where there could be lesser banks or there could be more banks. So it really depends, right? But what is really helpful here is that you do not need to reconstruct your search strategy again, all right? So when I click on view results of these 131 banks, right, so this is where it starts to get a bit more interesting, because earlier on when we were looking at the report of a single bank, that is just one bank. But right now we have 131 banks, right? So depending on how you search for it, you may have thousands of banks, right? But in this case, we have 131 banks. And over here, you can see it's in the table form. So it's very similar to how you look at data in Excel format. It's just that before we export this or before we download this into Excel, we want to have the columns of data that we need, right? So from here, we can just go to add or remove columns on the right hand side over here, right? Because the existing columns that you have, it may not be totally what you want, right? You may have very specific fields. So if you click on add remove columns, then you'll be able to customize the fields. So when you click on that, on the right hand side, you will see all the existing columns that you are seeing right now. And usually what I'll do is that I will suggest to remove all. So we start with a clean slate, where there's only one column of data available, which is the name of the entity or the name of the bank, right? And some of the other information that you want to include, right? So depending on what kind of data you want, right? Usually when you are looking at a report, like what we've seen earlier on, whatever data points that you see over here, over there, could also be made available as a column of data in a table form. So in this case is that probably part of my data massaging, I will need to know the country of each and every bank in this particular population. I would need to have the specialization, because earlier on we chose Islamic banking and commercial bank. So if I need to do some form of cross comparison or cross analysis, right, then I need to have a column that tell me for each of the bank that I have, what specialization are they in. Okay. Identification number, right? Usually we would recommend to include at least the PVD ID number. So why is this useful? It's because depending on the data point that you chose, right? You may choose to do some kind of pivoting or VLOOKUP. The PVD ID number will help to act as a unique identifier for you to do some of all these Excel functions, because there could always be banks with the same name, right? They might be different banks, but due to certain reasons, they have the same name, but the PVD ID will always be unique. It will be different. So if you intend to do some of the Excel functions that you need a unique identifier, the PVD ID would be a very helpful data point that you can use. Okay, then from here, you can also include other things like financial data. So financial data, you can include things like the detail format or national format or some of the ratios. Right, so obviously if your population only consists of Islamic banks, so you can always use the Islamic bank template and to include all the different kind of line items that you have, right? But if you have a mixed population of banks that may or may not be Islamic banking, but you want to have apple-to-apple comparison, so you can consider to use detailed format, right? And this is where you have the typical line items of a banks, right? So again, it's really up to you of what kind of data that you want to choose, right? And you can choose based on one by one of the line items, or if everything within the income statement is what you want, okay, you can just click on add all, right? Then from here, you can then choose to say that, okay, I want to pick the last 10 years, since those are the ones that I have determined to be available, right? So as you can see, it can go all the way to many years before, but if you want to choose the last 10 years, you can do that, right? So you can see the relative years is up to the last 30 years. The currency, so by default, my default currency is USD, right? But you can include other currency as well. You can include USD and another currency of your choice, or the original currency in the units of measurements and exchange rate and the columns. So within the columns, you can reflect the value as it is, or also the percentage difference in values if you want to do a comparison year on year. So again, it's really up to you of what kind of data points that you want to add it. Okay, I wouldn't be adding each and every one because obviously everybody's requirement would be different. But I just want to show you how we can add all these items together, right? And you can just click on apply. Okay, so when it comes to the showing of all these columns, you sometimes you may see that, oh, only 80 columns of your view can be displayed, but all columns are available in the export, right? So sometimes also because of the design of the user interface, it may not make sense to show all the columns if you have a lot of them. But if you're exporting them, then yes, all this data will be available to you. So from here, you can see that, okay, based on the selection I made, I have the country, I have the specialization, I have the BVD ID number, and I have all these different data fields, right? All these numbers over here. Right? So from here, again, if it's something that you need to add on more columns, you need to remove certain columns, you can always go back to add or remove columns. And for this layout itself, you can also save it as one of the layout that you may think that you could be using it like the next time around on a regular basis. So you can just click on Save As and put a name to it. And click on Save. So you can save as many layout as you need to, right? So that every time, maybe for different projects, right, you may need different layout. Then you can just switch over to it by clicking on the drop-down list. So once you have this already, then of course the next step will be to export it out, to download it. So you can just click on Excel on the top right-hand side. To trigger off the download. Okay, so while the name doesn't really matter that much, just the file name, but the options that is made available to you. Okay, so whether or not you want to include the search strategy, which is all those filters that you've chosen to be part of the Excel file. The other one is also that if there are certain fields that has multiple value, I would say that typically, if you're talking about the financials, it's usually within each cell there will be only one value, which is the number itself. But if you're talking about certain other type of information, like for example, information such as like their business ID, right? Some banks may have more than one ID, which means that within the cell itself there could be multiple data. So in those cases where there are multiple lines of data, when you're exporting, would you want to keep one record per line? So if there are 131 banks in this example, then there will only be 131 rows in your Excel, right? So meaning to say that that particular cell that has multiple value, it will just simply be what it is, which is a cell that has multiple value. Or you will want to export each value to a distinct cell. So instead of 131 rows, you may have maybe 200 rows, for example. Again, this is a preference that you can choose. So once you have selected what you want, you can just click on Export. Then from here, the Bank Focus will process the request that you made to download the data. Right, and sometimes you might be doing multiple extraction of data. So this could be this for this project, and you need to download again for another project. So what you can do is that you can always just close it. And on the left-hand side, we have this export section here. It's a shortcut to when you click on export section here, you'll see that, okay, right now it's processing the first request that you made. So you could be making multiple requests. Right, and you could be closing the window so that you can do other things, right? So you can always go back to this export section here to then download the report once the process is complete while you're doing other things on Bank Focus. Okay, so when we go to Bank Focus again, is that based on the criteria that you have. Early on, I shown everyone how you can save a search strategy, where 3 months later, 6 months later, the banks that will appear in this list could be different, right? Because some banks may fall out, some banks may qualify, right? But what about if I want to save this specific list of 131 entities, right? Because maybe 3 months later, when I'm updating my research, right, I want to only look at this specific list of banks that I have used. So you can also save it. So on the top right hand side, you have this save button, save. And this time around, you're saving as a new record set. So you can put a name to it. I put it as demo record set. I've saved this set of banks. What it also means is that whether it's 3 months later, 6 months later, 1 year later, the banks in this list will not change, right? Because you're saving a specific list of banks. Just click on save. Okay. So how do you then load this set of banks, right? So when you are at the search page early on of where we are, you can see that we have this section here in the middle. We have add a search tab, which is where you can include or add on new filters. We have load a search, which is the loading of a search strategy that you have, which is all those filters. And thirdly, we have this load an entity set, which is the list of specific banks that you have, right? So this is where you can actually find all those search strategies or list of banks that you have saved to load it up. Okay. Okay, now we have 131 banks, right? So within Bank Focus itself, we also have some tools available, right, for all of our users, right? And because Bank Focus is used by different kind of customers that we have, right? We have customers in like IUM, which is academics. We have customers in the banking space, in the corporate space, where sometimes they may not be as skillful when it comes to using Excel to crunch data like you do. So what we have here in Bank Focus would be some of the quick and easy tools for them to do pivot analysis, to do peer analysis, or to do some simple kind of comparison or aggregation, right? But I would suppose that most of us here today, you would probably find it easier to download it into Excel and to do your own massaging. But just to show you that we have all these tools available in case you need a quick reference way of doing it. Now, coming back to the export section here. Okay, so earlier on, we went to do other things. So now we come back to the export section to download the data. Okay, once you click on download, you should be able to see that there's this Excel file that is available. You just open it up. So what you will be seeing in the Excel file, you will see two tabs. One would be the search strategy that you have, which will show you some of the overview information, especially helpful if you need to do some form of citation in terms of in your research paper. Those data will as of which date, which year, and so on, right? The research strategy that you have, right, some of the initial parameters, right? Of course, the most important part will be the results, which is basically what you see on screen on the user interface, or the table of banks, followed by all the different data over here. Okay, so then this is where you can start to do your data crunching or pivoting or charting or whatever that you need for your research. Okay, just like to take a quick pause here to check if anyone have any questions so far. Okay, let me check in terms of the chat group. Okay, if there are any questions for people on the chat room, please do share. Okay, Okay, let me just go back to bank focus. Okay, maybe for right now, this would essentially be the way of how you can use bank focus to search for the information that you need, how to extract it. Right? Not too sure if anybody here have any live examples of some of the challenges that you may be facing when trying to find information about banks as part of any ongoing research projects that you have. If there is, this would be a good time to share those questions that you can try to address it on the spot. Or for any particular extraction of data, right, on bank focus, if you need any help on, right now, it'd be great to raise any questions. Yes.
Can you download the, for example, the core characteristics? For example, I was asking if you could download the data of the directors, for example. So their size, for example, independence, how many of them are independent, how many of them are not. These kind of characteristics. Can you download that along with the financials?
Yes. So the question asked was whether or not we can download information about the directors along with the financial data. So the answer is yes. And how do we do that? Is that again we go back to the result interface. So we click on results. And earlier on, we have the layout where we have the country, we have the financial numbers, right? So we can also add in additional columns by clicking on add or remove columns. And from there, then we can go and choose, just scroll down. Just hold on while my bank focus is loading. Alright, so over here we can choose directors and managers. We can also include things like their full name, for example. Right, we can include their job title, appointment date, whether they are current or previous directors. We can also include other role information, the type of role, the board that they are in, right, and so on. But just to take note is that when you have set up the layout earlier on, so you could have hundreds of columns. So when you start to add in additional columns of data, the additional columns of data will appear right towards the end. Right? So you may not see it on the user interface, right? But you can see that on screen right now, the additional data points that you have chosen is reflected at the end of the columns. Then over here, of course, we have 100 plus columns, but if you don't have that many, maybe you have 5 or 6 columns, you can actually shift the order easily, right? So on the right hand side, there's this button here at the box. You can just move your mouse over, click and hold, and you can shift it up or down. So the order of the columns can also be changed. But if the intention is to download them into Excel, then probably you may not need to do all this manual shifting right now. You can just download to Excel and do your own changing of the columns if you need to. Right? So this is how you can actually get all this information alongside with the financial data.
Thank you so much.
Okay, no problem at all. Okay, so once you have selected the columns that you want, again, you can always change it, right? There's no limitation of how many times you can modify your layout and so on, right? And you can save as many layout as you need to. Now, the other thing is that earlier on we have saved this set of banks, right? So let's just go back to the portfolio landing page, right? So just additional information. So when you start to save all these banks into Bank Focus, right? And you go back to the portfolio landing page, you will start to see all these banks that you have saved that will be displayed in the dashboard, right? So of course, for research purpose, it may not be totally relevant because all these are more for monitoring perspective. But just to show you like how by saving the banks into Bank Focus, you will give you additional information regards to all these different banks that you have. Okay, so we are about 2 hours in. I know that we have allocated a lot more time for this, but usually for Bank Focus, we don't expect it to be too lengthy. But I'm here. If anyone wish to ask specific questions to your research or to your project, please feel free to let me know. Then we can discuss specifically to the questions that you have. Thank you.
I think there was a question in chat. I saw a question in chat.
Let me see if there's a question in the chat. Okay, can I repeat the step on how to add the country and specialization in the data? Sure, thank you for the question. Right, so let me just go back to the search page and start again. Okay, so if you were to click on the magnifying glass, you will come back to this page where you can start to include in the different filters or the different search criteria that you have. And if you talk about location wise, okay, firstly, you can click on location, and on the right hand side, you will have the world, region, country, or region and country, right? Why do not use any of those below? Because usually either you are looking for banks in a specific city or you're looking for banks in the US whatsoever, then the below items will be more relevant. If not, if you're looking for banks in a certain region or in a certain country, then the first one will be sufficient. So just click on location and the first item on the right hand side. Okay, then from here, you can choose to pick individual countries, right, as many as you want, or you can pick based on world geographical regions, either based on world geographical regions or based on world political regions. So sometimes your research scope could be saying that, oh, they're doing a certain research based on banks within the OECD countries, right? Then you can just select OECD. And once you have made your selection, at the top, it will show you how many entities or how many banks fall into the selection that you have made. And click on OK. Alright, once you've done that, then the next part is specialization. So specialization can be found within activities and industry. So when you click on activities and industry, on the right hand side, you have specialization. Right? And for all these selection, you can see that on the right hand side, there's this star. So the star is not just for decorative purpose, but if you were to click on the star itself, right, you can see that all the stars that you click on, it will all appear under favorites. Right? So for example, if I were to click more stars and I go to favorites, so you can see that, okay, if some of the common search items that I would tend to use are some of those few ones, I can always click on it to mark it my favorite, so that I don't have to click into each and every one. I can just click into favorite, and it will appear all the different items that I have. Right. So the next step is go to specialization under activities and industry. Click on specialization. Then this is where I can start to include the specialization that I want. So in this case, it could be Islamic bank, it could be a commercial bank, it could be savings bank, it could be whichever bank that you need. Right? Then click on OK. right? Then from here, if this is all that you need, and that's great. But based on what we are saying, we have about 82,000 of them, so maybe the population is a bit too big. You may just want to narrow down a bit more. So let me just hold on to see whether there are any other further questions here. Okay, so I have shown how to add a country and specialization in the data. So once you have this, of course, the other way to narrow it down is probably based on the available accounts that you have, or you can based on, okay, let's say for example, I go under financials, global detailed. Okay, you can also use a particular financial item as one of the filter to narrow down. So for example, there are three main ones to choose from. The first one is variable. Variable can be, for example, you can choose, let's say, right, let's say assets, for example. Let's say total assets. Okay, I use total assets as an example. I use values. So values can be based on absolute value, can be based on the growth rate of the financial items that you have, or entities with a positive or negative trends, right? So for example, if you want to see banks that has negative trends of, or rather decline growth of total assets, for example, right? You can always choose this, and based on the time period, okay, you can choose multiple years, and when you scroll down below, you can then set the criteria of at least one of the selected years or all selected years. Okay, so there's a lot of variance in terms of how you can choose the selection that you have. And click on OK. Okay, so depending on what you have included, you would have about, from 82,000, you have about 2,000 banks that fit all these criteria. And of course, from here, you can put in certain things like, I would want to find banks where they have a certain kind of shareholders, so you can do that as well. Or the banks where they have foreign shareholders. So there's a lot of mix and match that you can do in Bank Focus to find what you want. So this is basically the key value that Bank Focus can offer to you, where it will suit to what you're looking for from a data perspective. Okay, let me see whether there are any other questions. Okay, no further questions till here. All right. So please do let me know if anyone have any other questions. Especially for the users who have not used Bank Focus before, usually the case is that you may not know what you don't know. So most of the time is when everyone start to use a bit more of Bank Focus, then they would be able to know what are the questions that they have. Then they can always reach out to us to provide answers to those questions.
For once the user log in, right? Normally, how long that they can stay logged to that Focus account?
If let's say they log in, they don't do anything. If I'm not wrong, it's about 30 minutes.
They will automatically
log out. Yeah. All right. If not, thank you for your time. I hope this session has been useful for everyone. And for those online, thank you for joining us online through Teams. And again, if there are any questions pertaining to how we can perform certain functions in Bank Focus, or if certain information is available, please feel free to reach out to us as well. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Focus is.
Right. Okay. In order to use the bank focus in future, you just go to the library website. I believe that all of you must know, right, how to go to the library website. You just type UN library, and then click on the first one here. Okay. You can choose whether you want to click on off-campus or databases and ebooks, because the username and password only provide when you log in. So how to access it? You just click database and then you click on off campus, then you log in, and then the username, and after you log in, you click back at the bank focus, and there is a username and password provided, 5 username and password. Okay, so this is how you can access for the bank focus after this.
So if the access is from the library side, then please reach out to library. But anything related to bank focus, for example, you want to understand what is the definition of profit margin, even though yes, there will be in user guide, but you wanted to understand more or any kind of technical inquiries, then can email to our support team, clientservices@moodys.com. And from there, please use English, then there will be a case reference number generated. Then using the case reference number generated, then can follow up and can reach out to us. Then we will then answer any questions from the email. Yes?
I'm just asking if you have a manual user, so we can, for example, easy, we can just submit to our students, they can just follow, they can flow by the, because majority of our students are joining our training today, and our supervision. So later on, maybe, you use time, we just can fast within the manual user, then we can go through that, but focus, then they can do the data by themselves.
Yeah, so we for those students who are not here today, we have the online user guide that has the video and the walkthrough that will guide them step by step on most of the key functions that I have demonstrated today. But of course, again, if when they are trying to play around with bank focus or they're trying to get the information that they need, they can't seem to get it, they can always reach out to us on the images.
So for the user guide, sir, there is this. There's no hard copy. It's all online. You could actually go to the question mark here. When you log in, right, to the system, there will be a question mark beside the username. Click here. There will be an interactive walkthrough, online guide, video. For example, how to build a search, like how Edwin showed. Can just click build a search. Then next, there will be a video here.
The Build a Search tool offers a wide range of criteria and features that let you customize searches and
Something
manage
like
the
that.
results.
Okay? So everything, if I may repeat again, go to the question mark beside. Yeah. Yeah. And then content, online guides.